Welcome back, friends, to what should be the last episode on rebuilding this S4. And for those who are new here, I bought this car a few months ago with some front end damages, some suspension damages, and some side damages that turned out to be worse than expected. And then in part 2, I bought another S4 to be used for parts. This thing had 200,000 miles, a junk title, yet it was in great shape mechanically and visually, apart from some slightly obvious damages. Now that I had both of these together, I started swapping parts to get the original car back together. And with that done, here's what's next. This stuff here isn't really visible on pictures like it isn't visible to you. Right now this car looks perfectly normal. Well, it's not, because there's like $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 worth of damage down here. This is something I've never dealt with before, but our rocker panel as well as the floor section have been pushed in significantly. This entire thing should be like a solid 2-3 inches away from where it is now. The parts car I gave to a guy who needed the drivetrain out of it, and he has now returned it completely stripped down. That was kind of our deal, that he takes off whatever he wants off of it. He paid me, I want to say, 1,500 bucks. And he got the drivetrain as well as anything else possible from this vehicle. Now I just need the shell, because I need to be the one who junks it, just legally a requirement of me as a car dealer. And I also need to cut this entire section out, which I have never done before. And this is going to be interesting for me and hopefully you. I'm going to bring this to the body guy, who is going to weld this on and pull out the damage you can see over here, because obviously, unfortunately, this thing is not in perfect condition either. I have never done anything like this before, which is why I would never trust myself to weld this rocker on. We're gonna have somebody way more qualified to do this than myself. Should be interesting.
My own world of make-believe. Kids screaming in the cradle for remedies. I see the world through ice covered in bleach. Cross out the ones who have my cars and watch me weep.
This is insane. Now this looks insane, but it's finally done. I've never seen a car in this state, but it's cool to see it once in a lifetime. Hopefully I never have to see this again. This was just really hard. Looks like we spent 5 of my cutoff discs and then 2 or maybe 3 of these blades. Something else we're going to do to this car is install our Redtiger F17 LE dash cam. I'm also going to hardwire it because they were kind enough to send us a hardware kit. Straight out of the box, this is what the camera looks like. Of course, we're going to have a camera for front view, we're going to have an interior camera, as well as a rear camera, which is going to record anything behind the vehicle. Now inside the hardware kit, we have everything needed to feed the power directly from the fuse box, so that we don't have to use this guy and have extra wires on our interior. So this end would connect to the fuse box and this end would just connect into our dash cam. There are multiple settings that you can tailor to your own preference. You can have this thing shut off when the battery reaches 11.6 volts, 12 volts, or 12.4. And here's what this whole thing looks like when it is installed. We have the wires going into the headliner being nicely hidden away right in there. This is the only piece that I actually had to remove, which is really easy. There's a T20 Torx inside under this little cover, and then we have the wires running down there into our fuse box right here, where we have both the accessory mode and the power wire going in from these 2 fuses. As you can see, the original fuses are still in there, so the original circuit is unaffected. We are just adding another circuit to power our dash cam. And once we go into our app and click record, this is what we end up with. The quality is excellent because we do have 4K in the front camera, 2.5K and 1080 in the other 2 cameras. Not to mention the new technology allowing for full color capture at nighttime. Plus, the parking mode allows you to record time-lapse video if you hardwire this dash cam like I did. I'd give you guys a show, but there's a lot of people around. Ladies and gentlemen, the S4 is back from the body shop and it's looking way better than it used to. I'm still waiting for the new side skirt to come in, but this kind of gives you an idea of what it looks like. I mean, this entire thing was replaced, and I honestly have no idea what it looked like in the process. I saw a few pictures, but this is a massive project, and the guy who did it, Max, has done a great job. I'm perfectly happy with this. One of the things I gotta get done is the most common issue on these cars, and that is the PCV. In fact, in this case, it is the water pump that's leaking coolant, and it's leaking it pretty significantly. I think we leaked about 1/3 of a gallon after driving it to Milwaukee and back, which is a solid 150 miles. And you can notice the coolant smell after every drive. It kind of resides in the engine bay. At first I thought it was our PCV valve, but it isn't. Our water pump definitely has a leak. So when we do the water pump, we're also going to do the PCV, the thermostat, and a slight carbon cleaning. First we remove the intake. And after that we just disconnect and remove anything that holds the supercharger to the car. All right, now that everything over here is kind of tucked out of the way, we can loosen up the 6 13mm nuts holding the supercharger down. And theoretically, this thing should be able to just come right up. What makes this easier is sticking some extensions into these holes here. There we go. Easy enough. Oh, I did forget something. Now the fun stuff begins. Here's our water pump, that most likely is what's leaking, and our PCV. To get all this out, we're gonna have to remove our, I don't know what to call them even. They're sort of like an intake manifold, but that just goes under the supercharger and has a fuel rail built into it. We're gonna remove all of these intake flap things. They just pop right out. And we're gonna clean these off before we throw them back in. We can use this as an opportunity to take a look at our intake valves and see how carboned up they are, which honestly I've seen worse. It's mostly on the stems is where I'm seeing the majority of our buildup. Yeah, honestly, this looks really good. I am surprised, pleasantly. Next, we remove the air filter to get access to this fuel line that's in the way of our PCV valve. Now this next part is where it starts getting a little more annoying. In order for us to get to the PCV bolts, we need to get this coolant pipe out of the way, which can slide back in order to get it out of the water pump. However, in order to do that, we need to remove that T30 in the back here, and that one is a little tough to get to, but it is still more or less doable. Just unpleasant. Little by little, it's coming out. So now this tube should be able to wiggle out of here little by little. We just got to give it some pressure in that direction. Definitely takes some effort, but should be doable. There we go. That popped out, and we got a lot of coolant in our valley here, which is not good, but we can get rid of that. There we go. Right, so now that we don't have a whole lot of coolant in the valley here, we can remove our PCV valve, and we really didn't want to do that earlier because that would allow the coolant to go into our oil. All right, so now the PCV can come up theoretically. And this kind of paints the picture of why this is kind of a flawed design, because the PCV valve is plastic and sometimes plastic cracks. And what that can lead to is this coolant dumping into the valley over here, which gives direct access to our oil and crankcase, which is something we really don't want. Next comes the two words that most Audi people are terrified of. The service position. Alright, so now that we have the service position with the radiator support unbolted and on those two long bolts that I've inserted into the frame rails, we have a little bit more room to play with here, and we can probably get to our triple squares holding the water pump pulley on. Granted, it does take a little bit of effort. There we go. And I think the water pump should come out even easier than that. So yeah, I don't think removing that side of the pipe is necessary. Pump should come out. There we go. Yay. We have a little vacuum line onto the side of the pump. There we go. we go, that popped out. I'm pretty sure the main cause for a leak was this gasket for the thermostat. It kind of looks like the most likely reason for the leak because that's where all of the residue is. So now all I have left is to replace all of the seals, replace the thermostat, water pump, and start putting these things back together. And here are all the parts that we're going to be putting in. All of this is from FCP Euro. I'm not sponsored by them, but I love them, use them all the time. Highly recommend them. All of these are OEM parts. As you can see, the water pump has all the Audi logos, so does this. Everything else is already here, so let's just get to work. After I clean up all of the mating surfaces where our thermostat and water pump used to sit. For the cleaning, we're using a brass brush that avoids scratching. It's not too harsh and it's not going to actually gouge this metal. Next, let's replace this O-ring here. Okay, I gave in and decided to remove this side of the coolant pipe as well, just because I'll feel better knowing that that has a fresh new O-ring. So now this can come out way better, and this way I'll be able to get to both of the seals much easier. Start with the thermostat because that is much easier to install when the pipe is nice and loose. All right, the belt is now back on. Get rid of all this coolant. All right, now our PCV is fully installed, and what I'm gonna do is manual, quick carbon cleaning. I know there's people out there using walnut blasting and all that. In reality, all we really have to get rid of is larger chunks of carbon, because almost immediately this tiny layer is going to reoccur after the car does like 1,000 miles. So all we really need to get rid of is the large pieces of carbon. I'm just scraping them off the valve with this plastic trim tool. And then to get those out, we simply use an attachment to a vacuum cleaner. I also have some fogging oil, so we're going to spray that. That should help us dissolve some of the carbon. This stuff is perfectly safe to go inside the cylinder. That's actually what it's meant for. And engines that sit for a long time. This will allow it to break up some rust and carbon buildup inside the cylinder so that your piston rings don't get damaged once you start cranking an engine that's set for too long. So here's a before. And here we go, guys. I cleaned up the mating surfaces for our supercharger or the fuel rail, those guys. And the valves look like that. I know a lot of you got spoiled by looking at walnut blasted valves. This is nowhere near as clean, but I can promise you it's just as functional. And the walnut blasted ones are gonna look exactly like this within like 2 weeks of driving. Now this part here is where we can actually mess up and need to be pretty careful to make sure that we don't have to take the supercharger off again. I am afraid to admit that I've been in the situation where I have made this mistake on multiple occasions, at least 3 times I can think of. So after we lube up our injector seals, when we go to set this down, there is a flap in here, and that redirects the air from the intake and kind of affects the combustion in one way or another. So this flap is going to get stuck on these inserts if we just set it down like this. So we really need to make sure that we compress this while we are sitting this down. Otherwise, these flaps are not going to work the way they should. And you will pretty quickly get a check engine light because the car is going to figure out that these cannot move. All right, I got the vacuum lines over here in place. I also frequently forget these, so I'm glad I didn't this time. This can go right back on and keep these things nice and cool, or at least not as hot. There we go. Nice and slow. Okay, with these 2 hoses, I think we're fully sealing up our coolant system now. I don't think there's anything else left. So we can start creating a vacuum so that we can vacuum fill it. Connect that to this. and just give it some compressed air. And here we go. This is gonna start sucking in air out of the cooling system, and once it's at the correct pressure, we can start sucking in the actual coolant. In the meantime, I'm just gonna finalize and put everything back together. All right, and just like that, she's ready, and it's time to take her for a drive. So now one of the very last things we gotta do on this car is install our side skirt that just got painted, because it turns out I ordered the wrong color, or at least in the pictures I couldn't tell that it was gray rather than black. It just wasn't really visible, and it wasn't in the description. And then something I've noticed while I was gone on vacation is that the battery on this thing dies pretty quickly if you don't drive it. So we're gonna throw a brand new battery in. Now, speaking of dead batteries, our long-term sponsor Top Down has sent us their Jump Surge 2000 Pro, and I decided to give it away to you guys. The Jump Surge 2000 Pro is made for 12-volt batteries and is capable of starting anything up to an 8-liter gas engine or 6-liter diesels. It has a peak current of 2500 amps and is capable of doing up to 35 jump starts. All of that can be done safely thanks to the technologies built in, which prevent it from shorting out, overloading, or causing issues due to reverse polarity. All you need to do to have a chance to win this is subscribe and leave a comment. And then I'll use a random comment picker, find the winning person, and ask them to send me their name and address over the email. Alright, so now that this thing is fully charged, let's try and find something that's gonna be the hardest to start. And I think that's gonna be our 5.3 here, because it basically hasn't moved in the last 3 months. And just to add to the challenge, not only is this thing pretty dead, it's also pretty misfirey. So all we have to do is plug this guy in over here, hook up the positive to the positive and negative to the negative, and go ahead and try to start. Look at that. Let's see, can I do it again? Yes. Again. Yes. Again. Not too shabby for a little guy like that. So I'm gonna plug this guy in so that it's fully charged for its new owner, which could be you. So make sure to subscribe and go into the comments, leave me something down there, something pleasant. I'll be sad if I have to give this away to a rude comment, but rules are rules. And in order to do the coding, we simply go into our gateway module, we go into adaptation, channel 4, and we simply need to change a single number in the serial number here. And that's successful, so we can just write this new coding, and that lets the car know that it has a new battery. And just like that, this S4 is ready for sale. I just listed it for $14,500. And if any of you are interested, feel free to leave a comment below, or just send me an email, or find my Facebook page online. I would let it go to a subscriber for $13,000. In the end, what we have is a 115,000 mile S4 that does have a rebuild title, but it does have all of its common maintenance issues addressed, like the water pump, thermostat, PCV. We also have tires in excellent condition, aftermarket wheels, intake, and that's about it. And if this thing sells, I will update the description of the video below, so make sure to check that first. And I'll also include all the information about how much I spent on it, how much it sold for, and whether or not we made any money on this thing. Something to note is that I did spend a lot of time on this car. This was one of the bigger projects, and I also spent a lot of money on this because the bodywork was very expensive, and yeah, things added up, that's for sure. Thank you guys for watching, thank you for following this little series, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a great day.